Hello, my name is Darren Thomas, and I am the Director of Educational Research Techniques. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at attitudes and behaviors of students. So let's see what we can learn. So we're going to be focusing primarily on these four topics that you can see on your screen. We're going to be defining what attitudes are. In particular, we're focusing more on attitudes versus behaviors. Next bullet is components. The third bullet is the formation, and lastly, we'll take a look at actions, or you can also say intentions. All right, so attitudes can be looked at several different ways, but often they're considered the feelings or thoughts that a person has about something. So you can have a good attitude or a bad attitude. Somewhere in the middle, it's a continuum, and we have to keep in mind that it's like a psychological construct. In other words, you can't see an attitude. Rather, it's the actions and the behaviors of somebody that helps a person to understand what that person's attitude is towards something. So, for example, if somebody loves football, you can tell they love football because of the behaviors that are attached with that. They watch football, they get excited about it, they cheer, whatever. Or perhaps maybe somebody likes to read or to code. Again, you can tell by how they behave that they have a positive attitude about something. And so this is where students get in trouble. Students will get in trouble because we will define them as having a bad attitude. In other words, by the way they're acting, it indicates that they dislike or have negative feelings or emotions or thoughts about something. It could be something like studying or doing their math or, having to get up to go to school, whatever it is. There are lots of different ways to have a good or a bad attitude. And as I've already mentioned with the second bullet, it can be defined across a continuum. In other words, it's not so much categorical, but it can be a mixture of good and bad, indifferent, neutral, whatever. Let's continue. Now, there are several components to an attitude, and you can see they're broken down into these three components, like I've just said. Cognitive has to do with beliefs, what people, think. Obviously, affective has to do with their emotions and their feelings. And lastly, intentional, their intentions or what they're going to do, which is sometimes difficult to measure. So someone can, somebody can have a very strong convictions about something, beliefs about something, and that is their attitude towards it. It could be beliefs that are positive about something or negative, like, for example, race. It could be positive or negative or somewhere in the middle, or it could be something about, different cultures, whatever. The same thing is that sometimes people don't always use their thought processes. They might use their emotions to try to determine their attitude. So they might love or hate something or like something or be indifferent, whatever. And then, of course, the intentions is what they're thinking or planning to do. But like I said, intentions are not the same as actually doing something. But it's like, this is what I would do as an example. And again, all these have been measured with various Likert scales and psychological constructs and latent factors, etc. Let's move on. Now we're looking at attitude formation. And so there are three different routes through which attitudes are formed or created. And again, we're not going to sit here and say that any of these are mutually exclusive. A person might form their attitudes through using one or more of these different ways. So these three ways are dispositional, situational, and social information processing. Let's take a look at each one. So for dispositional, attitude is like the same as personality. In other words, it's kind of fixed. In other words, if you don't like, for example, salads, that is a fixed part of your personality. It will never change. That's just the way it is. Now, for the teacher, what this means is that you are not able to influence or change a student's attitude towards something. So again, if you ascribe or accept the dispositional viewpoint, what's going to happen is that if a kid doesn't like school, he's just not going to like school, and there's nothing you could do about it. It is fixed in his personality. That attitude is fixed in his personality. Let's move on. And so again, if you have this view, you can see that it could be very, very difficult to try to bring change and to encourage a child to change their attitude. Now let's move on. Now for situational, the attitude matches the context. In other words, it changes from place to place. Now, in this type of a situation, the teacher is able to provide to influence. So going back to my example, let's say a kid does not like math. Well, it might be he doesn't like math because the classroom is noisy, or he might not like adding, but he likes subtracting, whatever. Being aware of how you can change the situation to help the child to change their attitude can be very, very powerful. And so, of course, you can have success or failure if you ascribe to this point. So, in other words, the environment plays a powerful role in this particular formation of this particular person's attitude, excuse me. Now, having said that, the prior one was kind of like it's already fixed. It's kind of like a nature versus nurture sort of thing. The dispositional viewpoint is kind of like a nature is fixed, whereas the situation is more like if you nurture, you can change their attitude. It all depends on how you would like to see these things. And the last one is social information processing. Now, in this one, which is very similar to the last one that we just talked about, which is right here, situational, this, instead of it being like the general environment, the person's attitude is based on other people's attitudes. So if everybody else, hates the salad, or if everybody else hates math, the student is going to go along with that. If everybody else loves it, the student will go along with that. In other words, they don't really have an attitude about whatever it is that they're kind of changing to. And so with this, the teacher, if you put a bad kid around good kids, if he's a social information processing type kid, you're going to get better results, as an example. Now, intentions is another aspect of how attitudes are developed or whatever. And so when you have to keep in mind that students and people in general, they want to be consistent, especially young people. They're often very sensitive to hypocrisy and inconsistencies because they don't quite understand how difficult it is to be strong and firm every single time and to never give in whatever situation, even though young people often fall victim to peer pressure. Lots of young people say, I'll never do this, I'll never do that. But again, when that appropriate pressure is placed upon them, they make the same mistakes that any politician or adult would make. But despite this, children are very sensitive to inconsistent and hypocritical behavior. Because in their mind, which is often in terms of black and white, it should be like this, like this, like this. You should never do this. And in theory, that makes complete sense. But unfortunately, in the real world, human behavior is highly unpredictable. And as you just saw, attitudes can change based on the environment, based on social processing, etc. And so that is why intentions can be somewhat frustrating to try to be consistent with actual behaviors. So in this particular video, we took a look at attitudes, and what we did was essentially is that we defined them, talked about their formations, and we also talked briefly about the role of intentions in trying to line up what we think with our actual actions that we perform. And so for the classroom teacher, it is important to be aware of this because some have the view that attitudes cannot be changed. Some have the view that attitudes can be changed based on the environment. And some have the view that attitudes can be changed based on the social setting and situation that a young person is in. And so now that you're aware of these, you know that you have these different avenues through which you can hopefully change a child's attitude to be more in a positive direction when it comes to their academic studies. So I want to thank you for listening. My name is Darren Thomas. I am the Director of Educational Research Techniques. Thank you very much for watching and take care.